Der Packs am Start. Ja, Mann. Neu. Dorn. So eine Grafik gibt's gar nicht. Ich schwöre bei Gott. Aus Werl. Jemand hat das verkauft. Ja, was heißt gebraucht? Mit Folie noch. Ja, ja. Jawohl, jetzt geht's wieder, Bruderherz. Warte. Boah. Tamam oldu ya, super, Alter. Ich danke dir, mein Freund. Ey, wenn du willst, komm kurz rein. Ich habe 32 Spielerwahl-Packs. Die ich jetzt. Ciao. Hallo? Test, Test. Kamera, Kamera. Spielerwahl-Packs. So. Test, Test, Test. Warte mal. Mein Mikro war wieder leise. Jetzt geht's, glaube ich, wieder. Musik machen wir ein bisschen lauter, ne? So, wir fangen an jetzt. Thomas Ruli ist Nummer 1. Ter Stegen. Sofort der zweite, Alter. Courtois! Ja, sicher doch. Lenglet, sehr gut. So, ich will Varane, Leute. Varane oder Messi. Pacheco. Alter, wie viele habe ich von denen, ja? Also bis jetzt knapp 500.000 haben wir jetzt dafür ausgegeben. Hazard. So, sehr schön bis jetzt. Aspas. Obwohl, nee, warte, wenn ich 500.000 ausgegeben habe, ist das nicht gut. Für 500.000 ist das nicht gut. Dorn, ich habe gerade 6 Stück gemacht vorhin. Ich schwöre bei Gott, von den 6 habe ich 2 Tots gezogen. Wallah, aber jetzt gar nichts, Alter. Wallah, nur Müll. Nur Müll. Jawohl! Ja, Mann! Ja, Leute! Ich hab Varan! Ich hab Varan gezogen, Leute! Live! Live Varan! Ende aus, Leute! Leute, Ende aus! Es ist vorbei, Leute! Ich habe Varan gezogen, Leute! Oh mein Gott! Oh, ich muss das jetzt als Aufnahme machen. Oh, geil. Geil, oh. Danke, Dorn. Oh. Ja, Mann, ja, Mann, ja, Mann. Jawohl, Alter. Wallah, ich hab FIFA jetzt durch. Sergio Busquets, Sergio Busquets. Der Junge! Oh mein Gott! Oh! Bam, bam, Bigelow! Ich bin ein Gigolo! Ich bin der König! Geil! Nein! Bam Bam Bigelow, ich bin ein Gigolo! Jetzt kommt Messi! Jetzt kommt Messi! Jetzt kommt Messi! Jetzt kommt Messi! Noch auf dieser Seite kommt Messi! Leute, ich hab FIFA durch, Wallah. Ich hab FIFA durch. Ich hoffe meine Mutter, ich hab FIFA durch. Ja, Leute, Boah, kranke Scheiße, Leute. Kranke Scheiße. Kranke Scheiße, Alter.
Because the same word can have many different meanings. When people say that time is the fourth dimension, what does that mean? The fourth dimension adds a way for the third dimension to change. This is obvious when we say the third dimension is space without time. But the entropy-driven arrow of time that people associate with this concept is obviously not spatial because it behaves in ways that are different from the first three dimensions. This is why some people prefer to say that the fourth dimension is a...
Ich bin der König, ich bin der König.
But the more we learn about space-time and general relativity, the more we realize that time is not just an arrow. The fourth dimension stretches, it bends, and quantum entanglement shows that it's possible for particles to make instantaneous connections within it, even for there to be causality in time's reverse direction. And
Oh my God! Hadi oldu, buna görüşürüz. Engin! Oğlum TikTok'un amına koydun. TikTok'un amına koydun. Oğlum
able to accept that time is a
Aycan,
direction,
bak
not a
Aycan
dimension, in the
hepsi
same way that up
kafayı
or forward
yiyecek.
are directions rather than
Kafayı
dimensions.
yiyecekler.
Two opposing directions can be used to describe a spatial dimension, and time and anti-time are two words we can use to
3
describe the
milyon.
fourth dimension. But they're not the only words.
Diyorum da 2
And this is
milyon.
important because
Anlıyor.
all we're really trying to do here is come up with words that describe the dimension which is at right angles to the
Lan
third
bedava ya oğlum
dimension.
ya.
Here's something important to remember. None of these dimensions exist in isolation. You can't make a 1D line without using points. You can't make a 2D plane without lines. You can't make a 3D space without planes. And you can't have a 4D duration without multiple Planck frames of space. Saying the fourth dimension is duration makes no more sense than saying the third dimension is depth, if when we say those phrases, we're thinking you can have duration without space, or depth without length and width. Saying the fourth dimension is space-time, then, at least acknowledges that the fourth dimension encompasses the dimensions from which it is constructed, and doesn't exist in isolation from the other dimensions. Let me say this again. It doesn't matter what label you put on the fourth dimension, or any additional dimension, as long as you're thinking about how the new dimension is somehow at right angles to the ones before. A rose by any other name still smells as sweet, to paraphrase Mr. Shakespeare. So, time is not really a dimension, but no matter what dimension you're examining, the direction of time is a word we can use for tracking change from state to state. In Art There Really 11 Dimensions, I insist that it makes no sense to say that the first 3 dimensions are spatial and the 5th dimension and above are spatial, or at very least space-like, but then to say that the 4th dimension isn't spatial. If that were the case, then the mental castle we're building here has a very rickety layer at the 4th dimension, and the whole structure is prone to crashing down. Last entry, we talked about how it's really impossible for us to see the 3rd dimension because it takes a certain amount of time for the light from anything in the 3rd dimension to reach our eye. And that's just as true for our hand in front of our face as it is for a star 10 light years away. Saying that a 3rd dimensional object has length, width, and depth is a phrase we casually say, but we have to keep in mind that discussing a 3rd dimensional object like a cube is the same as discussing dragons or flatlanders. A 3D cube is an idea which we can freely discuss, but without using the 4th dimension to view such an object, it's only a concept. Likewise, persons who talk about tesseracts as being 4-dimensional objects say that this is what the real 4th dimension is like. But what we're really talking about with a tesseract or any other n-dimensional shape is the same as a cube. It's an idea. In order for a tesseract to really exist, it has to have a duration within its dimension. And when we watch an animation of a rotating tesseract, we are visualizing how that structure could rotate and change from state to state over time when viewed from the 3rd dimension. Likewise, just as a cube represents a simple and idealized shape within the 3rd dimension, but there are the limitless range of other shapes that can exist within the 3rd dimension, the additional degree of freedom afforded by the 4th spatial dimension allows for an even larger number of other shapes which can exist within that dimension. One word physicists use to describe the path an object takes within space-time is a world line. Another word for a 4th dimensional shape, coined by author and futurist Bruce Sterling, is a spime. With my
So,
Imagining the 10th Dimension project, I ask people
jetzt.
to visualize themselves in the 4th
Team,
dimension as a long,
okay?
undulating
So,
sphere,
Team.
which is a way to think about
Da
the
brauchen wir
depth
jetzt nicht
as
mehr
it represents
diskutieren.
a person's length or duration within the 4th dimension, from conception to death. Do you see how that snake is a spime?
Gefickt, Alter.
Depending upon your point of view,
Ne,
though,
Wallah, jetzt
that
muss ich
snake
Marcelo
will be
machen.
much blurrier than what we show in the original animation. Every day, our bodies are exchanging atoms with the outside world through the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink. A constant cycle of repairs and replacement means the spime representing a person from conception to death is a much more wide-ranging and interconnected shape than what we might first imagine. One of the 26 songs attached to this project, called Change and Renewal, is about this idea. Let's finish off by thinking about the point-line-plane postulate again, which can be used to visualize any number of spatial dimensions. The trick I've suggested you start with each time is to think of a point that encompasses the entire dimension, then find a point that is
Jetzt muss ich
outside
Marcelo
what that
machen.
first point
Wallah.
encompasses. So a one-dimensional point, in the largest version of its indeterminate state, occupies the entire length of a line, and some new point not found anywhere on that line allows us to visualize the second dimension. A two-dimensional point, in its largest version, fills an entire plane, and a point not within that plane gets us to the third dimension. A third-dimensional point at its largest version is like a single Planck unit-sized slice of the entire universe, and allows us
So,
to
warte,
think
wir
of
gucken mal jetzt die Karte von Marcelo an. Marcelo.
that each of those 3D frames allows for the instantaneous quantum connections often deemed as supremely mysterious and unfathomable. Having said that, though, we still have to decode the mystery of how we can have a physical world made out of objects that are not infinitely large within the third dimension. And this is why I say those quantum connections are at right angles to space-time. So let's continue the point-line-plane postulate's logic into the fourth dimension. A 4D point at its largest version would encompass the universe not just in space.
So Leute, ich beende meinen Stream. Ich komme gleich nochmal live. Bis dann.